Welcome back to Vedic Living. Right now, we are still talking about the fifth house. We talked about Sun, Moon, and Mercury in the fifth house. Today, it's a turn of the planet Mars. Mars in the fifth house. What does Mars signify? Physical activity. So, a person with Mars in the fifth house their life would be full of activity. They would just always be doing things, they would never give up, and always persevering to be better at whatever they do. And just like a sportsman quality, because it's Mars. Mars is a planet of activity. It's a planet, it's in mythology, it's the god of war. So that's what describes best what they do. So they like to be good at whatever they do. They want to be best at it. It's Be it sports. Most of them are good at sports. They have a strong competitive spirit, and usually because of that, they end up being sore losers. They don't like losing. They like to be really good at what they do. So if they lose, they'll try and try again until they become good at what they do. So with Mars there, it is a red planet. It's anger. So anything to do with the fifth house, if they lose in any of those activities, they could become really angry because that's the Mars energy. Mars in the fifth, it's also good for direction. They are very motivated to do whatever they want to do, and it is a good position for having children. Mars in the fifth, you would think it would not be because Mars is a malefic, but typically with Mars in the fifth, it's a good position to have children because you're kind of directed and you want to have children. And it's very likely that the first child will be a boy because Mars, like Sun, is a masculine energy. So when they do have children, the first child, it's very likely will be a boy. Or if not, the child will be will have a lot of, let's say, Aries or Martian kind of tendencies, making them more like masculine, very driven and like playing sports and being good at all kinds of physical activities. And so their children could be like that because they have Mars in the fifth house. They would always have active children who want to go out and run out in the park or do things, or be good at sports and all that. So that's one thing to remember with Mars in the fifth. In any situation, what happens if Mars is in the fifth house, like I said, anger could be a problem if they don't win at whatever they're doing. They want to be the best at what they are. Also, because fifth house rules children, there is a high tendency for the child to copy the parents' approach towards life, and hence end up themselves having a life of filled with activity. Okay, because the children learn from their parents, and because the parent is like that, and fifth house rules children, it's very possible that the child will also end up with that kind of a personality, always going, always doing things, always being active and physically doing stuff all the time. Mars usually signifies strict discipline. So, as a parent, the native could be very strict and overbearing on their children with Mars in the fifth house, because that Martian energy is directed towards the fifth house, which does signify children. So that's one of the things with Mars in the fifth house. And when I see that in my clients' charts, I always tell them they should find it in themselves to learn to be soft and nurturing towards a child, because it may not come naturally to them with Mars in the fifth. They don't think it's wrong to be strict, but there is a balance that needs to be found there, because an excessive amount of Martian strictness or kind of like a disciplinary attitude towards the child. Remember, the fifth house is children. So when you make the fifth house the first house, that's your child's chart. So when the child grows up, they could also be like that. as a person, very strict and disciplined. So maybe finding a little bit of softness and nurturing would kind of balance that energy out. They would have, people with Mars in the fifth would have plenty of sports and hobbies and things to keep them busy. They like to remain busy. And it's also important for them to remain busy, or else they'll go into a state of depression, because that Martian energy does need an outlet, or it's going to get suppressed, which we don't want that to happen. So that's an important thing to notice. Always remain active when you have this kind of planetary placement in your chart. Mostly you'll see people who are in the army, they could be in sports, they could be in the military. Mars in the fifth is, believe it or not, a very good position for engineers. And I've seen that in a lot of charts where Mars in the fifth is an engineer. And they may have more sons than daughters, like we talked about, or if they do have daughters, the daughters could be very Aryan and Martian kind of tendencies, because that's Mars as it rules the house of children. Now, one thing to remember with this placement with Mars in the fifth house is during times of challenging transits to that Mars, if there's any transit going on at this time to that particular Mars or to the fifth house, there is a possibility for a fallout or a fight between the parent and the child, because it rules the fifth house of children, and Mars does signify a warrior kind of energy. So there could be some fights that could happen temporarily while that transit is happening. So that's something to watch out for when the transit happens. The fifth house rules the mind and intelligence. Mars being there, with Mars in the fifth house, the native would be extremely intelligent and very good at working on mechanical stuff, like with their hands, right? Because the fifth house rules the arms. So their creative energy is all directed towards making things and physical activity. Okay, so that's Mars. So that's just something to remember. And also, if you compare and contrast this with our Mercury in the fifth house that we talked about last time, it was to do with speech, because that's Mercury. Mars is physical activity and sports and being busy all the time. So that's kind of how you can compare it, the energy. So if you can see at a high level, the house meaning does not change. That remains the same, but the planet placed within kind of tells us how that house meaning is going to get expressed in the world, right, by the person. So that's just something to excuse me, remember. So now that we know the high level meaning of Mars in the fifth house, let's talk about a celebrity chart, a person who has had Mars in the fifth house. And the chart that I have chosen today is that of world famous pole vaulting champion Cornelius Warmadan. And the reason I chose his chart is because if you see, he has a very strong Mars placed in Aries, in its own house, Swakshetra, in the fifth house. So it's a very good example. He was, once again, as per Wikipedia, a world record holding American pole vaulter, and he was known as the pioneer of pole vaulting. He began pole vaulting at the age of 12, and the first time he did it, apparently he used the limb of a peach tree. So you can see that physical activity thing coming out here from a very early childhood itself. He dominated the sport during his time. In the early 1940s, he used a bamboo pole to pole vault, and he was the first person to vault over 15 feet, which was at that time called the unbreakable barrier. And he kept trying, again the Mars in the fifth house, until he was able to do it. And he broke that unbreakable barrier, and he remained the only person to be able to do so until the year 1951. So for many years, nobody broke his record. and that was a big thing. Mars has a lot of energy. It is, and usually people with this placement, like we talked about earlier, are avid sportsmen, and and that's what you're seeing here, and the not giving up kind of attitude. No matter what happens, people say it's an unbreakable barrier, but he wanted to break that unbreakable barrier. Now, it was said that he enlisted in the military. Again, Mars in the fifth house, military and army and all that. And because of that, because of World War II, he could not compete in the Olympics because it got cancelled those years. So again, just to mention that, Mars in the fifth house, sports, uh, not giving up kind of attitude, being in the military, army, always being active. He coached pole vaulting way into his 60s, and even at the, I think, into his 80s, he was physically very active, playing golf, and very he had to keep doing something all the time, because with that Mars in the fifth house, you don't want to suppress that energy. You want to somehow find an outlet for it, and that's what he did. And he became very famous doing that too, because of that Mars being so strongly placed in Aries. So that's one of the examples that I wanted to review, and I think it's a very good example for Mars in the fifth house. So let me know what you think. I'm gonna come back in a couple of weeks with Saturn in the fifth house again. It's very interesting. A little Saturn with all its discipline and hard work and everything being placed in the fifth house, and we look at a celebrity chart to just go over that placement as well. So I thank you again for joining me today, and I hope you come back next week. Subscribe to my channel, and I hope you have a great rest of the week. Thank you. Bye.